Well, as you know, I'm Susan Mailer. Well, I hope you know anyway. And I must say I had a lot of trouble deciding what to read today. I thought I could read from when I was a child, and so you could see how Norman was as a father, or I could read when I was an adolescent, or I could read when I was a child, an adolescent, and an adult. But then I decided, after talking to Vince at the last night and talking about being in different places, and he's British, and he's been in the United States for a long time, and I'm American, and I've lived in Chile for a very long time, 40 years actually. So I thought, well, I think I should read about that, about what it means to be in another place, which is the title of the book. And so what I'm going to read today is when I first got to Chile, and then when my father first went to Chile. So the first part will be about me and my husband and going to the American Embassy during dictatorship, and what it was like to live in a country that was under dictatorship. And then the second part, the second chapter, will be about when Norman went to Chile. The first chapter is called, What is Norman Mailer's Daughter Doing in Chile? We moved to Chile in 1980 and got married. We were convinced by then it was important for us to live near Marco's kids. He also felt he needed closure with the failed experience of Allende's government and the trauma of the coup. And me, I was ready for a change, but didn't really consider all the pros and cons of moving so far away to a country under martial rule to boot. Actually, I thought of it as a new adventure. Besides, I figured we could simply move back if we didn't like living there. We bought a small house, a white house, in the foothills of the Andes, perched on a half-acre of land. The high ceiling and large windows framed the magnificent mountains. We bought the place at the end of the summer, so we didn't consider mundane issues such as heating and insulation. Those problems would make themselves evident later, with the chilling onset of winter. We didn't have a phone, since no lines were available in the area at the time, yet it all seemed lovely and bucolic, just perfect. The feeling was short-lived. Once it hit me just how far away I was from everyone, literally at the end of the world, I felt very lonely. The country, which had seemed so cheerful and bright on my first trip, turned out to be gray and depressing. Soon, so was I. For one, there was little for me to do, so I took long walks with Hamlet, a beautiful Siberian husky we'd brought from Mexico. After crossing several valleys, we'd reach a small farmhouse that sold almonds and jam. I'd chat for a while with the farmer and then walk back. By that time, half my day was over. Only a few more hours to go before Marco arrived home from work. Or sometimes, after our walk, I'd go to Mary's, my sister-in-law, for lunch. We would settle into an afternoon of Brazilian soap operas, both lying on her bed watching the on-screen drama. Yes, we were definitely at the very end of the world. The Big Dipper was upside down in the southern skies, and the seasons had reversed for me. It was hot, so very hot during the Christmas season. Most of my life I'd spent that holiday with the Mailer clan, so I was used to the New York holiday scene. The frosty winter air, the amazing animated Fifth Avenue holiday window displays, followed by lots of presents and an early dinner at Dad's apartment in Brooklyn. Marco's family, on the other hand, didn't celebrate Christmas. They were Jewish. Of course, so was I. But an assimilated New York type of Jew who'd celebrated a secular holiday all her life with plenty of gift shopping, Christmas carols, eggnog, and snow. That first December in Chile, I felt disoriented. I was 7 months pregnant, without any friends or my own family. On Christmas Day, the temperature hit 90 degrees. Memories of Mexico were also a constant ache. I walked through the streets of Santiago feeling lost. Everything reminded me I had no history in this city. Some afternoons, I'd see teenagers leaving school and recall my friends at Secundaria Albert Einstein. In Mexico, so many streets, corners, or neighborhoods held childhood memories or had exciting adolescent experiences attached to them. Now, I yearned for those days and my old friends. I hungered for the scent of cilantro and avocado, of fried carnitas, of fresh corn tortillas. I missed everything from the colonial landscape to the pre-Columbian presence. I pined for bold Mexican colors, shocking fuchsia, golden yellow, indigo blue, bright reds, deep purple, turquoise, and deep greens. Chile was unremittingly, depressingly gray, with an unspoken threat hanging in the air. That first year, we noticed a white Peugeot always parked right outside our house. At first, we paid little attention, but seeing it out there day after day, always in the same place, finally took its toll. We figured the CNI, the Secret Service called Central Nacional de Inteligencia, was doing surveillance on Marco since he'd only recently returned and was still considered a possible enemy of the state. The CNI obviously wanted us to know they were watching, and I was spooked. Sometimes I'd wonder what would happen if they took him away. We didn't have a phone, lived in the foothills far away from the rest of the family, and we didn't know our neighbors. Marco instructed me on what to do and where to go if they did come one night. They always came at night, he said. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel secure in my own home. I walked around with a knot ever present in my stomach. Many times during the day, I'd catch myself turning around to look behind me, just in case. Chile also had a curfew. By 1 a.m., everyone had to be home or at least indoors unless you wanted to be picked up by the police and put in jail. When we went out to dinner, everyone spoke in low tones, almost whispers, so as not to be overheard, except, of course, if one was pro-Pinochet. Then there was nothing to fear. I could always tell who was in favor of the government because they acted as if they were masters of the universe. Around this time, I was introduced to a psychoanalyst who worked in the psychiatric hospital. He invited me to attend the Thursday clinical meetings he chaired and to work pro bono in the hospital's halfway house. Slowly, I began to stitch together a network. Most of the young psychiatrists and psychologists had been students during Allende's government, and most were anti-Pinochet. Their jokes, their easygoing style, the neighborhoods where they lived, the schools they had attended, all these small bites of information told me something about them and their politics. I was beginning to understand the codes. Living under an authoritarian government described the boundaries between friend and foe very clearly. One could always recognize who was on your team. There was an underground culture, not visible in the mainstream of Santiago's everyday life, but noticeable to those who were aware of it. Marco and I were a part of that culture. Many of our friends, like my husband, had left Chile and then come back, while others remained after the coup. I learned many years later that a few of our acquaintances were in the country incognito, underground, doing underground activities. We felt like comrades united against the government, even though not all of us actively worked against Pinochet. During those years, we felt we were all resisting the regime in one way or another, and this helped us to develop a bond and feel part of an important movement. In April, I went to the American Embassy to register my daughter Valentina, who had been born in February of 1981, and get her American passport. Marco had to renew his tourist visa, so he came along and filled out the paperwork. 7 days later, he told me his visa had been rejected. He wanted me to go with him to find out what had happened. We entered the grand old mansion that housed the American Embassy near Parque Forestal and asked to see the consul. A young man came out and explained that Marco's visa had actually been rejected higher up. When I asked why, he said Marco was considered persona non grata because he'd been exiled. I said, but obviously he's not exiled anymore. If the Chilean government doesn't think he's dangerous, why should the American government? Please fill out the questionnaire, was all the embassy guy said. The questionnaire requested Marco's name, my nationality, my mother's name, my father's name, my place of birth, and Marco's place of birth. We filled everything out. Okay, said the young man, I'll take this to the consul. He glanced over the form. It says here your father is Norman Mailer. The Norman Mailer? Yes, I said, the Norman Mailer, thinking, now we're getting somewhere. You know what? I'm just a schlep here, he said. I have to take this to my boss. Please wait. We sat for a half hour until he reappeared. You have an appointment with my boss next week. On the appointed day, we were ushered into a large office on the second floor. A middle-aged man in a shirt and slacks, but no jacket or tie, shook our hand and asked us to come in. A thick folder, about this thick, lay on the table next to him. He said, Mr. Colodro, I see you want a tourist visa. What is the reason? My wife is American, her family is American, we just had a daughter, my in-laws live in the States, and we want to visit in July. Marco answered, there seems to be a problem. Would you agree to answer a few questions? Of course, Marco said. The man opened the folder and began asking Marco about his past. Mr. Colodro, you went to Cuba in 1964, when you were still studying at the University of Chile. What was the reason for this trip? It wasn't a personal invitation, Marco answered. The invitation was extended to the whole class, and all students, left and right wing, went to Cuba. Next, the man asked Marco about his studies in Paris. At last, he finally came to the main question. You came back to Chile in 1970 after being in Paris for 2 years, and you got an important position at the central bank. Now, why would a 30-year-old man with no previous experience in government get such an important position if not for his political affiliation? Marco answered calmly, at the Sorbonne, I studied under Ignacy Sachs, a well-known economist and a specialist in foreign trade. He was my thesis advisor, so when I came back to Chile, I was offered a position in the central bank as head of foreign trade. You are talking about Allende's government. Yes, and you were a socialist. Marco nodded. Well, I think we might have a problem with your visa because of that. I said, because he was a socialist or because he worked for Allende? Why would that be a problem, working for Allende's government? Allende was a democratically elected president, unlike Pinochet, who was a dictator. And at the time, being a socialist was not against the law. The man turned and looked me straight in the eye. Let's not get into that, he said. I was not put off. I am an American citizen. My daughter is American. My family is American. I don't see why my husband should have a problem getting a simple tourist visa. He has a leftist past, which is considered a security risk by the State Department. This is ridiculous, I said. If the visa is denied, I'll send a complaint to the pertinent authorities. My father is Norman Mailer. He has connections, as you might imagine. My mother is a member of Amnesty International. My uncle is one of the producers of 60 Minutes. I figured this guy was CIA, but instead of being cautious, I felt empowered. In the embassy, I was on U.S. territory and therefore had the right to speak my mind. I had suddenly, instinctively adopted my father's combative spirit. After a pause, he said, well, I could offer your husband a waiver visa. We found out that would mean that every time Marco wanted to enter the United States, he would have to ask for a visa, one which might be rejected at any time. The State Department guy also informed us it was the type of visa given to those who pose a potential threat to the security of the U.S., like terrorists and drug dealers. In that case, Marco told them, I'd rather never set foot in the United States again. As we were getting up, the man said, look, I have to confer with my superiors in Washington. I'll get back to you soon. A month later, Marco received a 10-year multiple entry tourist visa to the United States of America. It was authorized by the State Department and stamped by the American Embassy in Chile. In October, I heard through the grapevine that a well-known Chilean psychoanalyst would be visiting the country to do a group therapy workshop. He lived in Topeka, Kansas. He had worked at the Memoir Clinic since the early 60s. He visited Chile every year to collaborate with a Chilean friend and colleague who who also would be leading the workshop. Both analysts were highly respected in Santiago. I decided to sign up. When I arrived at the venue, I found out there would be two groups, and that the leader of mine was not the analyst who lived in Topeka. I felt disappointed because I'd been looking forward to the connection with someone who lived in the United States. I was sure he'd be more sensitive to how I felt now in Chile. The session began. Wasting no time, the analyst who led my group asked us to describe our parents and our relationship to them. When it was my turn, I said, "My parents divorced when I was very young. I grew up in Mexico, far from where my father lived. I have a complicated relationship with him, even though we do love each other." I stopped there. The analyst looked at me as if, waiting for more. Finally, he said, "It will be helpful for everyone in the group if you can be more specific. Where does your father live?" Oh God, once again the story of my life, I thought, and continued. "Both my parents are American. After they divorced, my mother married a Mexican, so I grew up there while my father lived in New York with his second wife. Later, he remarried a few more times, 4 to be exact. I have 1 brother from my mother's second marriage, 7 brothers and sisters from my father's 6 marriages, and another brother from his 6th and latest wife's previous marriage." "You said your relationship with him was complicated?" "What do you mean by that?" The analyst inquired. "Isn't the scenario complicated enough for you?" I thought. What more could I say to describe its complexity in a reasonable amount of time? I was exasperated, but made an effort not to show it. Also, I wasn't sure how much to reveal. This was a weekend experience. I didn't want to open my bleeding heart unnecessarily. And lurking in the background was that inevitable moment when the analyst would ask, "And who is your father?" I was feeling uneasy at that point, to say the least. The analyst immediately picked up on this. "You seem to be keeping something back. I know it's difficult to talk about events that may still hurt us." He asked me to continue. "It's complicated because aside from all the separations and not living near him, my father has a very strong personality. He's also very well known, actually famous, which makes my relationship to him even more complex. We all think our parents are important and perceive our fathers as more powerful than they really are." Do I hear a subtle condescension in his voice, I thought, and said, "I know that, but my father is famous. He's a well-known writer. What's his name?" Finally, the question I'd been expecting. One I hated and at the same time relished because I enjoyed seeing the effect of my response. Heart beating slightly faster than usual, I said, "Norman Mailer." To my surprise, in a tone that he had made his point, the analyst said, "I've never heard of him." What? He'd never heard of Norman Mailer? I couldn't believe it. Weren't psychoanalysts supposed to be well-read intellectuals? His answer surprised me, but I responded in a neutral tone. "Maybe you haven't heard of him, but it doesn't mean he's not well-known. In the United States, he's a famous writer." And we left it at that. The analyst moved on to the person sitting next to me. There was a break midway, so the 2 analysts, the one from Topeka, Kansas, and this one, the Chilean one, who did not live away from Chile, could discuss what had transpired in each group, while all the participants chatted over coffee and cookies. Before we entered the room once more, the other analyst, the one who lived in Topeka, Kansas, walked up to me. With a big smile, he asked, "What is Norman Mailer's daughter doing in Chile?" Just as a side anecdote, the analyst, when I entered the institute, the Chilean Psychoanalytic Institute, Hernan, who was the analyst who was at the group and who didn't know who Norman Mailer was, and I became very friendly, and we would always joke about that time when he said, "Who is Norman Mailer?" I've never heard of him. It became a running joke between us. This chapter is a chapter called "Are You Norman Mailer?" And it's about the first time that Dad went to Chile. He went to Chile twice, and that's what I describe in this chapter. Alejandro was 2 years old when my father came to Chile for the first time, in late 1986. Earlier in the year, on September 7th, El Frente Patriótico Manuel Rodriguez, the Patriotic Front, a paramilitary organization and breakaway wing of the Communist Party of Chile, had tried to assassinate Pinochet. Immediately, the government imposed a 12 a.m. curfew. Houses were raided, people taken prisoner, tortured, and killed. Tension and fear tightened the air around us once again. Dad came incognito on this visit. He didn't want it known that Norman Mailer was in Chile. He had no desire to meet with the local authors, nor did he want any press or big social events. If I am interviewed, he said, I'll surely be asked what I think of Pinochet, fascism, and this government. I wouldn't want it to mean trouble for you and Marco. I came to be with you. He added, but I will have to work a few hours every day. Having suspected as much, I'd already set up a desk next to the window of his room so he could write without interruption. Once he settled in, his routine was the same as in New York. He woke early. We had breakfast, and then off he went to his desk. I enjoyed walking in the garden, peering into the window where he was seated, bent over his yellow legal pads, writing and talking to himself. Such a familiar sight. My father muttering sentences, the writer at work. Back when he was planning this trip, I suggested he come alone, that is, without Norris. We can have some quality time together, I said, without spouses. Once Dad arrived in Chile, though, Marco and I organized a short day trip to the seaside with him. When he saw my husband get into the driver's seat, Dad could barely disguise his surprise. I hadn't explained our no spouses agreement to Marco, so he naturally felt included. Clearly, my father was thinking, what the hell? I thought we were supposed to have quality time alone. But he didn't say anything, probably not wanting to put Marco in an uncomfortable position. What had motivated me to suggest he come by himself? Was I unwittingly merging Norris with Suzanne? In a previous chapter, I talk about, I described how when Dad went to Boulder to give a conference, he arrived with Suzanne Nye, and I had no idea that he was coming with her. I thought he was coming alone, and so he got off the plane, and there he was with this young woman who he introduced as his assistant. But I knew better than that. That I knew it wasn't his assistant. So I was very upset because he was married to Carol, and Maggie was very young at the time, like maybe 2-3 years old, and I didn't want to be an accomplice to this whole scene. So I described that in a previous chapter, and that's why I make the reference to Norris and Suzanne, wanting to leave out Norris. Maybe I was trying to leave out Suzanne. I had merged the two. So was I unwittingly merging Norris with Suzanne? Perhaps, but I was not aware of the possibility at the time. To be honest, as much as I'd come to love Norris, I didn't relish the idea of walking the streets of Santiago as her invisible companion, or feeling like the ugly duckling once more when Marco's family met her. I also felt embarrassed for this pettiness, for not rising above it, as Dad would have said, but I couldn't help it. In terms of my father, the motivation was more complicated. When I suggested he come alone, I have thought it would be a good opportunity to spend together some time with no competition, no interruptions. But when we were planning the trip to the seaside, it never occurred to me to leave Marco behind. Somehow, I didn't realize the contradiction between my words and my behavior until I saw the confusion and surprise on Dad's face. Perhaps I wanted him to feel as shocked and surprised as I had been when more than a decade ago he had arrived in Denver with Suzanne. I might have wanted him to feel like the third wheel for a change. Or maybe, despite what I had said, I didn't really want to be alone with him and needed Marco as a buffer. It had never been easy to be around my father for long periods of time, and traveling in a car all day meant close quarters. And who would drive? Certainly not Norman. He was a terrible driver. After Boulder, because I had an accident in Boulder because he started telling me how to drive. So I turned to look at him, and we almost fell off the cliff. So that's why I mentioned the situation in Boulder. So I said, after Boulder, I didn't want to get behind the wheel with him next to me again. Marco, as driver, solved the dilemma. The three of us went to Valparaiso, also called Pancho, which is a diminutive for Francisco, for its likeness to San Francisco. We headed to Viña del Mar and then on to Zapallar, which means zucchini, the Chilean equivalent of East Hampton, which was spectacularly beautiful. Dad was impressed by the forests that grew all the way down to the ocean, the well-tended gardens of the European-style homes that decorated the winding streets. He observed, the rich certainly know how to choose the most beautiful places, but Zapallar, zucchini land? Not such a great choice of a name. We took Dad to see a political play that was popular then, What is in the Air, Lo que está en el aire. A few months before, the leading actor's son had been kidnapped by the Chilean secret police. He was found dead the next day, lying on a dirt road with his throat slit. Even though Dad couldn't understand the Spanish dialogue, he was quick to pick up on the anguish that seeped into the main character's performance. Afterward, he said, I'm surprised the play was allowed on stage. We explained the reason. It was a small venue, so the viewers would naturally be restricted to the size of the theater. Letting it run was a luxury the government could afford. An easy way for Pinochet to claim to the world he was actually a benign and tolerant leader. Before Dad left, I threw a party for him, inviting my friends and the Colodro clan. That morning, the two of us went for a hike in the nearby mountains. The walk uphill was strenuous, and Dad had to make an effort to keep up. I was used to hiking on weekends with my dogs. We were almost home when Dad tripped and fell, banging his forehead on the pavement and scraping one knee. Not severe injuries, but he was furious with himself for being so clumsy, and a little embarrassed later on when he had to explain to the party guests the ugly bruise on his forehead. Of course, after a couple of drinks, he charmed everyone. One day, he expressed a desire to see where I worked. When we arrived, there was no one in the office. It was probably a Friday afternoon or Saturday morning. As I opened the front door, he said, Sue, don't tell me anything about your colleagues. Let me look around and see what I can figure out about them. He recognized my suite immediately because it had a couple of Danielle Mailer prints hanging on the wall. Then he walked into another empty office and said, this woman is sure of herself. She's also an artist and has a no-nonsense quality. He walked into the third office. The woman in this office is a private person. She keeps to herself and is probably just a touch severe. How do you know all that? I said. Well, I'm a novelist after all. I should know something about people and the places they inhabit. He was right about both my colleagues, and I was impressed. He came to Chile again in September of 1988 on his way to Uruguay. I was about to give birth to Antonia, my third child. He was writing Harlot's Ghost and wanted to include a section on Montevideo. So he decided to come and see it for himself. In Santiago, he specifically asked to go to the Hotel Carrera. Apparently, it had been a CIA enclave in the months before the 1973 coup. We went to the hotel bar on the top floor. As we walked in, I noticed 4 United States Marines sitting nearby. They kept staring at us. Finally, one young Marine approached our table and addressed my father. Sir, we have a bet going here. Oh yeah? Dad said. What kind of a bet? That you're Norman Mailer. One hand on the table, he turned his torso to look up at the Marine and asked in the exaggerated Irish brogue he enjoyed putting on, and which one of you says I'm Norman Mailer? I do. Well, you can tell your buddies you just won the bet. Really? I don't believe you. Can I please show them your ID? Dad laughed and took out his driver's license. I still find it hard to believe that 4 Marines, very young Marines, stationed in Chile, probably guards at the American Embassy, would not only know about Norman Mailer, but also recognize him in person. That was a short, sweet 3-day visit. A week after my father left, I went into the hospital to give birth to Antonia. Often people ask me what it was like to live under a military regime for almost 10 years. But what no one ever seems to wonder about is what it felt like to live so long among people who knew nothing about me or my family. Chile is a long, narrow country surrounded by mountains. As isolated as an island, Chileans are, in effect, like islanders. Everyone knows someone who knows of someone who knows you. It is a place where your parents, your school, which branch of what family you belong to, are all cables that anchor you there in time and space and help people figure out your position on the social ladder. This was especially so in the 1980s. But I, the newcomer, was excluded from this web of relationships. I had no threads of my own. All anyone knew about me was that I was a gringa and that I was married to Marco. Most people could place his last name. They knew he was a leftist who'd worked for the Allende government, that he had left the country and come back in 1980, that he had been married before and had 3 kids from his previous relationship. Marco also had Chilean classmates and childhood friends, political allies, and enemies. Every time we went out together, he bumped into someone who knew him, whereas I had no roots in Chile. I had always wanted to be known for myself, not as my famous father's daughter. Yet when my wish finally came true, I didn't like it. Once, while I was still in my 20s, I had asked Dad, "Do you ever wonder if people are attracted to you because of yourself or because you're Norman Mailer?" He looked at me and said, "But I am Norman Mailer." After my first few years of anonymity in Chile, I finally began to feel comfortable not only with the fact that I am Norman Mailer's daughter, but that I am also proud of it. Thank you.